Car rolled to a stop beside me, the headlights washing the street in white. The HOA SUV was gone, taillights fatting toward the clubhouse, and the neighborhood had gone eerily quiet. Even the crickets seemed to pause. She didn't say a word at first. She just looked at me, her jaw tight, that calm expression she gets when she's past angry. I tried to explain what they did, what they said, but she raised a hand, steady and deliberate, as if to say, "Save it, I've heard enough." She walked straight to my truck, opened the door and said, "Drive." We didn't talk on the way there. The only sound was the hum of the tires and her quiet breathing, steady and sharp. I'd seen her in court before, cross-examining people twice her size into nervous puddles, but this was different. This wasn't a prosecutor on her way to a hearing. This was a mother who just found out someone had taken her child. As we turned the corner near the clubhouse, I saw the black SUV parked under the streetlight. The word "security" was plastered on the side in gold vinyl letters that looked like they were cut from a sticker sheet. Through the windows, I could see shadows moving, Rick and his buddies packing around like they'd actually caught a criminal. Told me to park across the street. Then she stepped out, adjusted her jacket and walked right up to them. No hesitation, no fear. Rick noticed her first. "Ma'am, this is a private investigation." She didn't even let him finish. She reached into her jacket, pulled out her badge, and held it up to his face. "County District Attorney, where's my son?" Rick froze. You could practically hear his throat click when he swallowed. Ma'am, we were just conducting." "Where is my son?" Each word came out slow and cold, like a warning before a storm. The other two guys looked at each other. One of them pointed nervously toward the clubhouse door. Didn't wait for permission. She walked straight in, and I followed close behind. Inside, they had sitting on a folding chair, hands bound with plastic cuffs. He looked pale, confused, and furious all at once. When he saw us, his shoulders dropped with relief. "Mom." She went to him immediately, knelt down, and said softly, "You okay?" He nodded, eyes glossy. "They said I was under arrest for speeding." Took a deep breath, stood up, and turned to Rick, who had followed us inside. "Take those cuffs off him, right now." Rick started to stammer something about protocol, HOA regulations, and safety concerns. Cut him off like she was back in court. "You've detained a minor without lawful authority. You're impersonating an officer. And if you don't release him in the next 10 seconds, you're going to jail tonight." Rick hesitated, eyes darting between us and the door. Then he nodded toward one of his buddies, who fumbled for a knife and cut the plastic ties. Rubbed his wrists, whispering, "They said they were calling backup." Turned to me, calm as ever, "Call the real police." I took out my phone, dialed the sheriff's office, and within minutes, you could hear sirens in the distance. The sound was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. Rick tried to backpedal fast, hands up, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that they were just trying to enforce neighborhood rules. But the second the deputies stepped through the door and saw standing there with her badge out, the whole tone changed. The lead deputy's face went blank for half a second, then respectful. "Evening, Mrs. What's going on here?" She handed him a card and said, "Impersonation of law enforcement, unlawful restraint of a minor, and possible false imprisonment. I'll be filing the paperwork personally." Rick's face drained of color. He tried to explain, but every word came out weaker than the last. The deputies escorted him and his two friends outside for questioning. The neighbors had gathered by now, whispering, holding up their phones. Flashlights cut across the grass, blue and red lights painting the street in surreal colors. Stood beside me, still shaking, and said quietly, "I thought they were real cops, Dad. They acted like it." I put a hand on his shoulder. "They weren't real anything, son, just bullies in uniform." Stood by the squad car, watching as the deputies questioned Rick, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to me and said softly, "I want every detail written down. Every minute, every word." That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to end with a scolding or a fine. She was going to dismantle them piece by piece. And as the fake HOA cops stood there under flashing lights, their cheap badges glinting like tin toys, I realized something. This wasn't the night they'd made a mistake. It was the night they'd met someone who didn't forgive them. The deputies spent almost an hour outside the clubhouse that night. Flashing lights reflected off parked cars and nearby windows. Neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering, filming, trying to make sense of what was happening. From where I stood, it looked like a movie set, except my son was the one in the middle of it. Rick sat on the curb, hands cuffed, still trying to talk his way out of it. His two buddies were standing nearby, faces pale, whispering frantically. Was calm, but her voice carried that sharp, deliberate tone that made even the deputies pay attention. She pointed at the fake badge pin to Rick's shirt. Where did you get those? Rick hesitated, then muttered online, they're legal to buy. Buying them isn't the crime, she said evenly. Wearing them while detaining someone is. He tried to shift the blame. Look, we were just following the HOA president's orders. She said we could enforce neighborhood safety if the sheriff's office was slow to respond. Raised an eyebrow. So your solution was to impersonate police officers and kidnap a minor. Rick's mouth opened, then closed. No answer. The deputies finished their questioning and moved to their squad cars, radioing in details. One of them walked over to, Ma'am, you want us to process this tonight, or should we hand it off? I'll handle the prosecution myself, she said, her tone calm but final. Just make sure the report includes everything, especially the part about the cuffs and the vehicle markings. The deputy nodded. You could tell he was both intimidated and a little impressed. Everyone in the county knew didn't bluff. When they finally took Rick and his men away, I turned to her. So that's it, they're done. She exhaled slowly. Not quite. If what he said about the HOA president is true, this goes deeper. Was sitting in the truck now, his arms crossed, still shaken but trying to act tough. When we got home, he asked quietly, Am I in trouble for anything? Softened, You didn't do anything wrong. You were targeted by people who thought power was a costume. That night, she stayed up late at the kitchen table, laptop open, phone buzzing every few minutes. I'd seen her prep for trials before, but this was different. There was something personal in the way she scrolled through documents, her jaw set, her eyes fixed. By morning, she had printed copies of HOA meeting minutes, incident reports, and an email thread between Rick and someone named P, who turned out to be the HOA president. The subject line on one email read, Community Safety Initiative Authorization. I poured her a cup of coffee and said, You're really going after them, huh? She looked up briefly. They didn't just harass our son, they built a system to pretend they had authority. That's organized misconduct. I sat down across from her. You think knew what they were doing. Gave a quiet, humorless laugh. She signed the expense report for their uniforms and the SUV rental. Later that morning, while tried to focus on his online classes, we heard a knock on the door. It was one of our neighbors, Mrs. Harper, the kind of woman who always knows everything before anyone else does. She leaned in, voice low. They're having an emergency HOA meeting tonight. Whole board's panicking. Of course they were. By evening, the clubhouse parking lot was packed. I could see people arguing near the entrance, holding printed flyers and phone screenshots. The HOA board sat behind a folding table like it was a courtroom. The president looked exhausted but defiant. She adjusted her pearls and said, Let's all remain civil while we clarify what happened. The moment she started talking about miscommunication and volunteer overreach, stood up from her seat in the back. The room went silent. Miscommunication, said. Your volunteers detained my son, a minor, using fake badges and an unauthorized vehicle. That's not miscommunication, that's criminal. Tried to smile, her voice trembling. Mrs., I had no idea they were acting as law enforcement. Held up a printed email, signature at the bottom. Then explain why you approved their patrol division and authorized vehicle decals that say security enforcement. The crowd started murmuring. Some of the board members looked at each other nervously. His face went pale. She said, almost pleading now, "Surely we can handle this internally." No, cut in sharply. You handled it internally when you created it. Now the law will handle it. The room was dead silent. Then someone in the back whispered, "Good for her." As we walked out of the clubhouse, I noticed people filming, neighbors nodding, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I could feel the shift in the air, the kind that happens when people finally see behind the curtain. When we got back in the truck, finally allowed herself a small smile. "They thought they could scare a teenager," she said softly. "Now they get to see what real authority looks like." I started the engine, looked over at her and said, "You know, I almost feel sorry for them." She looked out the window, her eyes hard. "Don't, this is just the beginning." And I believed her, because when said something like that, it never stopped at words. It ended with consequences. The next morning, our quiet little street looked like the aftermath of a scandal. Cars slowed down as they passed our driveway, neighbors whispering behind coffee mugs and half-open blinds. Word spreads fast in a small HOA community, especially when the district attorney shows up with flashing lights and fake cops in cuffs. I stepped out to grab the paper, but I didn't even make it to the curb before Mr. Bradley from across the street called out, "Heard your wife took down the whole HOA security team last night." "Something like that," I said. He chuckled nervously, then leaned in, whispering, "You think she'll go after the board too?" I shrugged. If they're involved, she won't have to go after them. They'll walk right into it. And I was right. By mid-afternoon, the HOA board members were already scrambling. Emails flew back and forth between them. I knew because a friendly neighbor who'd been on one sent me screenshots. The president was panicking. Her messages were short and frantic. "Do not speak to the media. We are cooperating fully. Delete any photos of the patrol vehicles." When got home from the courthouse that evening, she didn't even take her coat off. She sat at the dining table, opened her laptop, and started a call with the sheriff's office investigator assigned to the case. I could hear the conversation from the kitchen. "Yes," she said firmly. "3 individuals impersonating law enforcement. I have documentation from the HOA approving their patrols and vehicle use." A pause, then she added, "No, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were cold. I'd seen her like that in high-profile trials, the quiet, dangerous kind of calm that usually meant someone's career was about to end. Later that night, we sat outside on the porch, the sound of crickets filling the silence. Joined us, still a little shaken but pretending otherwise. He looked at his mom. "They said they could arrest me for breaking community rules." His tone softened. "They can fine you for leaving your trash can out. They can't handcuff you, remember that." I added quietly, "Next time you see a fake badge, just call me." Smirked, "Next time I'll call Mom. Clearly, she's the nuclear option." That actually made laugh, a short one, but still a laugh. The next day, everything blew up. The local news ran the story. Fake HOA officers detain teen, face criminal charges. They had clips from neighbors' phones, shaky footage of the SUV lights flashing, of stepping out in her DA badge, of Rick being led away in real handcuffs. The headline made our neighborhood sound like a crime drama. By noon, reporters were camped near the entrance of the subdivision. The HOA board issued a short, panicked statement claiming they were shocked and dismayed by the behavior of unauthorized volunteers. Read it and shook her head. Unauthorized, they have reimbursement forms signed by the treasurer, that's authorization in writing. Then she pulled up another email chain, this one between Rick and, discussing the purchase of uniform materials and safety decals. There it was, plain as day, had given the order to make it look official. That was the moment I saw the spark in his eyes. the one she gets right before she moves in for the kill. That evening, she called a friend at the sheriff's department and requested a meeting. "It's time we make this official," she said. "I want charges against the HOA board for aiding and abetting impersonation of law enforcement." Meanwhile, neighbors started turning on each other. Some defended the HOA, saying they were just trying to keep the community safe. Others were furious, demanding resignations. The once pristine suburban calm was cracking right down the middle. Stayed mostly in his room that night, scrolling through his phone. At one point he came downstairs and showed me something. "Dad, look, they posted a meme about Mom." It was a picture of in her DA suit under the caption, "When HOA power meets real power." It already had thousands of likes. I couldn't help but grin. Your mom's officially a legend. But she wasn't laughing. She was already drafting a formal motion, something about HOA governance misuse and endangerment, the kind of legal thunderstorm that could shut the whole thing down. Before she went to bed, she said quietly, "They thought this was about control. They're about to learn what accountability feels like." I nodded, looking out the window toward the dark clubhouse at the end of the street. It used to be just another neighborhood building, where people argued about lawn height and holiday decorations. Now it looked like something else entirely, the scene of a crime. And as the porch light flickered in the cool night air, I couldn't help but think. The fake cops might been taken away, but the real story, the real reckoning was just beginning. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept looping the same scene, my son, hands behind his back, shoved into the back of an unmarked SUV by two men calling themselves community officers. They wore tactical belts, fake badges clipped to their jeans, and those cheap mirrored aviators you'd expect from a discount store. And I kept asking myself the same question, what if my wife hadn't shown up when she did? Because by morning, something about the whole thing didn't add up. The HOA's president, Todd, a man who treated the neighborhood bylaws like holy scripture, was out jogging as if nothing happened. He even waved at me. "Morning, neighbor," he said, smug as ever. "Rough night, huh?" I clenched my jaw. "You want to explain why your officers tried to arrest my kid?" He stopped mid-stride, pretending to think. "Officers? Oh, you mean the security detail, they're volunteers. A little neighborhood watch initiative I'm piloting. Helps keep the peace." By tackling a teenager in his own yard. Todd shrugged. "Rules are rules, Dan. Your son parked that bike rack too close to the curb, HOA property line." He jogged off before I could answer. That's when I realized he was enjoying this. The power, the control, the fear he could create just by sending his little army around in matching polos and fake badges. But I also realized something else. He just confessed to it being a volunteer group, which meant they weren't real law enforcement. And impersonating one, that's a felony. So I did what any protective dad with an overworked district attorney for a wife would do. I documented everything. The uniforms, the SUV license plate, even the fake citation they left in our mailbox. It looked official at first glance, logo, HOA Enforcement Division, even a seal. But the seal, it said Community Integrity Unit. That's when I laughed out loud. They made up their own badge. When Sarah saw it that evening, her jaw tightened. They handed this to our son. Yup, claimed it was a lawful detainment. She looked up from the paper, her voice cold and precise, that voice she used in court. "That's not just impersonation, Dan. That's unlawful restraint. Possibly kidnapping if they transported him." I could tell she was already planning her next move. The next day, she went to the county office. She didn't storm in yelling or waving her badge. She just asked for records of permits for private security, neighborhood watch filings, anything under Oak Pines HOA. Nothing, not a single document. When she came home, she placed a thin folder on the counter. "You know what this means," she said. I nodded. "They're pretending to be cops without authorization." Her lips curled into a quiet, dangerous smile. "They're not just pretending, Dan. They're arresting kids. That's enough for an investigation." That evening, I decided to bait Todd a little. I walked by his house, pretending to water my plants. "Hey Todd," I said. "Funny thing, my wife looked into your community enforcement program. Didn't find a record anywhere." His smirk faltered just a bit. "Well, it's an internal thing. We're still getting it registered." "With who?" I asked. "The Department of Make-Believe Law Enforcement." He didn't like that. His eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Dan. We keep this neighborhood safe. Your boy should be grateful he wasn't charged." "Charged? You mean kidnapped?" He flinched, and that's when I knew he was scared. That night, a motion sensor light tripped outside our garage. When I checked the camera footage, there they were again, two of the same fake cops, walking around our driveway with flashlights, snapping pictures of our license plates. They were escalating. But they didn't know Sarah had already called in a favor with the county sheriff. By sunrise, an unmarked cruiser sat quietly on our street. The sheriff himself, a friend of Sarah's from law school, waited in plain clothes. He wanted to see the HOA cops in action. And when they came back that afternoon, dressed in their pretend uniforms and trying to issue another citation, he stepped right in front of them. "What agency are you boys with?" he asked, voice calm but firm. They hesitated. One of them stammered, "Community Enforcement Division, sir." He smiled slowly. "Never heard of it." Then he flashed his real badge. "But I have heard of impersonating an officer." I watched from my window as the color drained from their faces. They froze, not sure whether to salute or run. But before the sheriff could cuff them, Todd himself came marching down the street yelling, "This is HOA business." And that's when Sarah stepped out of our house, calm, collected, and holding her own badge. "Actually," she said, "it's now the district attorney's business." Todd's jog stopped mid-stride, the look on his face priceless. He didn't know it yet, but the game was about to turn completely against him. The moment Sarah flashed her badge, the street went silent. You could almost hear Todd's ego deflating. His officers froze like kids caught sneaking cookies, and the sheriff, bless him, didn't even raise his voice. He just took one slow step forward and said, "Boys, why don't you hand over those badges?" They hesitated. One of them actually tried to bluff. "Sir, we're under HOA authority." "Under what?" The sheriff laughed so hard he nearly dropped his notepad. "You think an HOA gives you arrest power? That's like saying your bowling league can issue speeding tickets." Sarah crossed her arms, calm as ever. "I'm the county district attorney. You're now part of an active investigation. I'd advise you to cooperate before you make this worse." They exchanged terrified looks. One slowly unclipped his badge and placed it in the sheriff's hand. The other followed. Todd was shaking. "You can't do this. They were just following community protocol." The sheriff gave him a long look. "Todd, you signed their paychecks, right?" "I volunteer stipends," Todd stammered. "It's not official." "Good," the sheriff said, "because if it were official, you'd be going to jail tonight for impersonation and unlawful detainment. Since it's unofficial, we'll just start with fraud and harassment." The neighbors had gathered by then, curtains parted, phones recording. The once feared HOA president suddenly looked like a kid caught shoplifting candy. That should have been the end of it, but it was. Because later that night, Todd made his next move. Around 9 p.m., I saw a few SUVs parked near the clubhouse. No lights, no noise, but I recognized the cars. HOA board members. The same folks who backed Todd's every ridiculous rule, from grass height restrictions to mailbox paint color. I knew something was up. I grabbed my jacket and took a walk, nice and casual, just a neighborly stroll. From behind a row of hedges, I could see right through the clubhouse window. There they were, Todd, the treasurer, two other board members, and one unfamiliar guy in a gray suit. He didn't look like a resident. He looked like a lawyer. Todd was packing, red-faced and sweating. "They can't just walk in and threaten me. I've been running this neighborhood for 8 years. The treasurer, a nervous woman clutching a binder, whispered, "Todd, they have evidence. The DA's involved. Maybe we should cooperate." Todd slammed his fist on the table. "No, we fight back. We'll sue the DA for harassment. We'll tell the press she's targeting a volunteer organization." That's when the man in the gray suit spoke up, his voice slick and cold. "You can try that, but it won't work. I've seen your security budget. You funneled HOA funds into a private account. That's embezzlement, Todd." Todd froze. The room went dead quiet. What are you talking about?" The lawyer pulled out a folder. "You paid those fake cops out of the HOA's landscaping budget. There are checks with your signature. If this goes public, you're done." For the first time since I'd moved into Oak Pines, I saw Todd's confidence collapse. He looked around, desperate. "We can spin this. It was community protection." But the others weren't buying it. One board member pushed his chair back. "You dragged us into this mess. You said it was all legal." I slipped my phone out and started recording through the glass. By the next morning, that footage was sitting safely on Sarah's desk. She watched the whole thing, stone-faced. Then she looked up at me with that half-smile I've learned to fear, the one that means someone's career is about to end. "Good work," she said. "This is going to make the morning news." And sure enough, by noon it did. Local HOA accused of running fake police force. The headlines spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors who'd once bowed to Todd's authority were now posting angry comments on the community page, demanding his resignation. But Todd didn't show his face. He went radio silent. No calls, no emails, no morning jogs. That's when Sarah got the call from the sheriff. "Sarah," he said, "we've been watching Todd's house. He's not there. His car, gone, but his bank records just pinged in another county." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "You think he's running?" The sheriff chuckled. "If he is, he won't get far. We've got a warrant out for questioning. Tell your husband to keep those cameras rolling. This isn't over." That night, as I looked out our window at the quiet cul-de-sac, the same street that used to feel so peaceful, I realized the HOA wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It had become something darker. A petty tyrant with fake cops, secret funds, and a growing list of crimes. And somewhere out there, Todd was still moving pieces on the board. When a man like Todd goes quiet, it's never because he's reflecting or learning a lesson. No, it's because he's plotting. 3 days after the news broke, the HOA message board turned into a war zone. Some residents wanted Todd arrested, others said it was all a misunderstanding, and one woman even started a petition titled, "Reinstate our HOA hero." That one made me laugh out loud. Meanwhile, Sarah was 3 steps ahead. She'd spent years as a prosecutor, and she knew Todd's type, prideful, desperate, and sloppy when cornered. "He's gonna make a move soon," she said one evening, setting her coffee down. "They always do. They can't handle losing control." She wasn't wrong. Around midnight, our motion sensor camera pinged again. I opened the live feed, and there it was, a black pickup truck idling near the old maintenance shed behind the clubhouse. And the driver, Todd. I zoomed in, heart pounding. He wasn't alone. 2 of his old officers were helping him load something heavy into the back, file boxes, computer equipment, even the HOA laptop. I whispered, "He's cleaning house." Sarah walked over, already pulling out her phone. "He's destroying evidence." She called the sheriff right there. "He's at the clubhouse. You'll want to bring a warrant." The sheriff chuckled. "Already have one, we just needed him to show up." Within 15 minutes, 2 unmarked cruisers rolled in silent, headlights off. I stood on our porch, watching the whole thing play out like a low-budget crime drama. Todd's goons were still loading boxes when the first cruiser's spotlight hit them. Sheriff's Department, step away from the truck. They froze again, for the third time in a week. I was starting to think freezing was part of their job description. Todd spun around, his voice cracking. "This is private property." The sheriff stepped out, hat low, flashlight in hand. "Not anymore, Todd. Not when you're hauling stolen HOA records across county lines." "I'm the president of this association," Todd barked. "Correction," the sheriff said. "You were. The board voted you out this morning." Sarah and I exchanged a look. We hadn't even heard that part yet. Apparently, the same people who defended Todd 3 days ago had finally realized the HOA was a sinking ship. The sheriff continued, "You're under investigation for fraud, impersonation, and misuse of funds. You can come quietly or—" Todd tried to interrupt. "You can't arrest me on my own property." The sheriff smirked. "That's the clubhouse, Todd. Technically, it belongs to all the homeowners you've been extorting." Todd's shoulders slumped. He looked around for support, but even his 2 fake officers were stepping away from the truck. They cuffed him right there under the floodlight, hands behind his back, his once perfect HOA polo stained with sweat and grass. But even then, Todd couldn't help himself. As they walked him toward the cruiser, he shouted, "You'll regret this, Sarah. You can't destroy the HOA. It's the backbone of this community." Sarah just folded her arms. "You did that yourself." For once, he had no comeback. The next morning, I thought it was all over. Until I checked our mailbox. Inside was an envelope, no return address, just my name, typed neatly. Inside were printed emails between Todd and a company called Shieldgate Security LLC. I scanned the messages. He'd hired them months ago. They weren't a real security firm, they were a front. A company that provided private enforcement services to HOAs wanting to appear official. Fake uniforms, fake citations, fake training credentials, all for a monthly fee. It was bigger than Todd. I brought the papers to Sarah, her eyes widened. "This goes beyond Oak Pines. If Shieldgate's doing this in other neighborhoods," she looked at me, almost excited. "We might be looking at a statewide racket." The sheriff confirmed it that afternoon. "You just handed us a Dan. They've been running this scam all over the state. We're calling in the state police." So now it wasn't just about Todd. It was about every HOA that thought they could play cops and get away with it. That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch, finally breathing for the first time in days. "You realize," I said, "our HOA drama just turned into a full-blown criminal investigation." She smiled. "Yeah, and you realize you caught half of it on camera." I grinned back. "Guess that makes me the neighborhood's favorite witness." For once, the air felt calm again. Kids rode their bikes without getting ticketed. Neighbors waved instead of whispering. The community finally looked like one. But deep down, I knew it wasn't completely over. Because the next day, the sheriff called again, and the first thing he said was, "You might want to sit down. Todd just made bail." When the sheriff told me Todd had made bail, I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out when you're too tired to be surprised anymore. Of course he did. This was Todd, after all, the man who once fined a widow for having unapproved garden gnomes. He wasn't going down without a spectacle. But I didn't expect his comeback to hit the courtroom. A week later, we got the subpoena. Todd had filed a civil suit against Sarah. His claim: defamation, abuse of power, and wrongful targeting of a community leader. I nearly spit out my coffee. "You've got to be kidding me." Sarah didn't even blink. "Let him, I could use a good laugh." By the time we got to court, the gallery was full. Neighbors packed the benches like it was a Friday night movie screening. Everyone wanted to see the showdown, the HOA tyrant versus the DA. Todd walked in wearing his old HOA polo like it was armor. His lawyer, some slick guy in a cheap gray suit, strutted beside him, clearly thinking this was his big moment. The judge, a patient woman with glasses and a stare sharp enough to cut granite, took her seat. "Mister," she said, "you're suing the district attorney for defamation." Todd nodded proudly. "Yes, Your Honor. She ruined my reputation, humiliated me in public, and cost me my position as HOA president." Sarah stood calmly, hands clasped behind her back. "Your Honor, the defendant's reputation ruined itself." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge smirked slightly. Todd's lawyer jumped up. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge said before he could finish. Todd tried to look confident, but his voice trembled as he gave his statement. He painted himself as a hero, a man trying to keep order in a community spiraling into chaos. He even cried. Actual tears. He talked about the ungrateful neighbors, the hostile media, and the vindictive DA who sought to destroy him for political gain. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then the judge turned to Sarah. "Your response, Mrs." Sarah didn't even open her folder. "Your Honor, we'd like to present Exhibit A video evidence from the night Mr. Associates unlawfully detained my son." The bailiff dimmed the lights, and the footage played on the big screen. There it was, Todd's two fake cops shoving my kid against the fence, barking fake orders, flashing fake badges. Todd himself was visible in the background, giving them a thumbs up. The room went dead silent. The judge leaned forward. "Mister, that's you in the frame, correct?" Todd swallowed. "That's taken out of context." Sarah nodded. "Of course, let's add context. Exhibit B." She handed over the bank records, the ones proving Todd used HOA funds to pay the fake officers. Then came Exhibit C, the emails from Shieldgate Security, signed by Todd himself. The lawyer's face went pale. Todd just stared at the floor. Sarah finished with one last blow. "Your Honor, the plaintiff not only impersonated law enforcement, but paid unlicensed personnel to harass residents. He then attempted to conceal those crimes by destroying records. And now he's suing me for catching him." The judge tapped her pen. "Mister, do you understand the definition of perjury?" Todd stammered. I just wanted to keep order." The judge raised a hand. "You abused your neighbor's authority and endangered a minor. This court isn't your HOA meeting." The audience actually clapped. The judge banged her gavel for silence. "Mister, your lawsuit is dismissed, and I'm referring this matter back to the DA's office for potential additional charges." Sarah bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." Todd slumped into his chair like air leaking from a balloon. After the session, as the courtroom cleared, Todd turned to Sarah. His voice was small, almost human for once. "You don't understand. I built this neighborhood." Sarah looked at him evenly. "Then you should protected it, not ruled it." For a moment, I almost. But as we walked out, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was the sheriff. He sounded serious. "Sarah, you might want to sit down. The Shieldgate investigation just uncovered something else." "What is it?" she asked. "They weren't just supplying fake cops," the sheriff said. "They were data mining, collecting residents' personal info, and guess who helped them set it up?" I didn't have to guess. The sheriff continued. Todd gave them full access to HOA records. Names, bank accounts, everything. He didn't just impersonate cops, he sold out his neighbors. Sarah's face hardened. Then this case isn't closed yet. That night, the community was buzzing again. People finally saw Todd for who he really was, not a leader, but a man who turned a peaceful suburb into his personal kingdom. And even though justice was closing in, I could feel there was one last act left in this story. Because Todd still had one final move. And it would unfold right on our front lawn. It was just past midnight when I heard the sound, tires crunching over gravel, slow and deliberate. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck turning around at the cul-de-sac, but when the headlights stayed still, aimed straight at our house, I knew something was off. Sarah was still up, going over case files at the kitchen table. She didn't even look up when I said, "He's back." Her pen froze mid-sentence. "Todd." I nodded, peering through the curtains. The same black pickup, the same rust on the bumper. But this time, Todd wasn't in his HOA polo. He was in a hoodie, alone. Sarah sighed softly, stood up, and reached for her phone. I told the sheriff this man would spiral. "Maybe he's just here to talk," I said, though even I didn't believe that. But Todd wasn't there to talk. He stepped out of the truck holding a cardboard box, the kind that once held HOA flyers or violation notices. His face was pale, unshaven, eyes wild with sleeplessness. He walked right up to our fence, stopping where the motion light caught him. "Sarah," he yelled, voice cracking, "you think you won. You think this neighborhood's better off without me." Sarah opened the front door, calm as ever. "Todd, put the box down and go home." "Home," he laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my home, my name, my life." I stepped closer behind her, just in case. He shook the box in his hand. "You want evidence? Here, take it, all of it. You ruined me, so take what's left." He hurled the box onto the lawn. Papers spilled out, old HOA documents, receipts, photos, even those ridiculous fake citations with his signature. "Everything I built," he shouted. "This community was perfect before you came." Sarah didn't flinch. "You built a prison, Todd. You called it a community, but you used fear to run it." For a moment, it looked like he was going to rush forward. Then red and blue lights lit up the street behind him. "Sheriff's cruisers." He froze again. The sheriff stepped out, hand on his holster. "Todd," he called out, "you're violating a restraining order. Step away from the property." Todd turned slowly, his shoulders sagging. "You people never stop, do you?" The sheriff sighed. "No, Todd, we don't stop when people endanger families." Todd didn't resist this time. He just raised his hands, muttered something about ungrateful neighbors, and let them cuff him one last time. As they led him away, he glanced back at Sarah. "You'll see, without rules, this place will rot." Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. "No, Todd, without kindness it already had." The next morning, Oak Pines felt different. No patrol SUVs creeping down the street. No fake citations taped to mailboxes. The clubhouse bulletin board, once plastered with Todd's rules, now carried a single notice. New HOA elections, open to all residents. For the first time, people smiled again. Neighbors who'd once been too scared to talk were now out front, chatting, walking dogs, helping each other repaint fences. The air felt lighter, like the whole neighborhood had finally exhaled. Sarah handed me a coffee as we watched from the porch. "You think they'll pick someone better this time?" she asked. I grinned. "Anyone who doesn't carry fake badges will be an upgrade." She laughed. "Fair point." A few weeks later, the sheriff stopped by to give us the final update. "Shieldgate security, done," he said. "State police shut them down. Over a dozen HOAs across the state were using them." Sarah nodded. "Good, people like Todd thrive when they think no one's watching." The sheriff tipped his hat. "You made sure everyone's watching now." He looked at me. "And your footage helped convict more than one person. You ever thought about joining the force?" I chuckled. "I've had my fill of badges for a lifetime, thanks." By the end of the month, the community held a small gathering at the park. It wasn't official, just neighbors bringing food, kids running around, laughter echoing off the trees. Sarah gave a short speech, nothing fancy, just a reminder of what we'd all learned. "That night could ended badly," she said. But it didn't, because people spoke up. Justice doesn't always wear a uniform, sometimes it starts with a neighbor who refuses to stay silent. People clapped, and for the first time since moving to Oak Pines, it actually felt like a neighborhood. Later that night, as I locked up the house, I noticed something on our fence, a small laminated sign. It read, "Respect over rules, kindness over control." No one claimed credit for putting it there, but I had a feeling everyone had a hand in it. Because the HOA didn't die when Todd left, it just grew up. And as for Todd, last I heard, he was teaching community management classes in county jail. Fitting right. Sometimes karma doesn't need to shout. It just hands you a mirror and lets you see the badge you never really earned. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.